a huge welcome to all of you. And to Sophie, thank you for your presence. I know it can't be easy being here. Six years ago, early in the morning, Uncle Kathy passed away. And I think by 5 or 6 o'clock, we had already moved to Zora's place to then start talking about the funeral. And it was a huge media frenzy. Eventually, a decision taken that this would be the burial site, but that it would happen on the 29th, just so as to afford as many people who were present the opportunity to have come through. When we came here 6 years ago, there was a lot of empty space. And today we stand here where Mozimula has become another resident in this section. And prior to him it was Ibi, and then Jesse, Don Matera, who are all located here. Now in jest I was saying that if you take just this section of Heroes Acre here, Yuma Sekela will provide the music. The opening prayer is by Bay. Bayes Nodia will do the so there's a big, his gravesite is there. You will provide the music, and then two of the country's finest poets, Brawoli Khotsisile and Don Matera, are also there. And then the hardcore politicians, Reg September, Kathy, Jesse, Ibi, Mosey, and others who are further up would add to that. The kind of closing legal of these proceedings, George Bezos, who's also there. So you can see just the history that is here. Now, you won't find anywhere, not on the city's website, not anywhere, a short write-up of the people who are buried here. That's one of the things we want to lobby the city around. We will do the work if they will at least provide the funding. But I think that they need to do more about some place where you will find information on the people who are resident here now. So we're also thinking that this year, Heritage Day, the foundation wants to invite as many of the stalwarts and the families of the stalwarts who are here to do a collective Heritage Day celebration, instead of each one of us doing our own little things, and some perhaps not even coming at all. But that we would want to do with the city and the province. And we think that that is in line with Kathy's whole quest for history to become part of an ongoing learning process. He was extremely worried that stories will get lost, memories will fade, and then sooner or later the place becomes just a forgotten site. So in his honor and on his 6th anniversary, that's the kind of work that we want to continue as we remember him here today. Mr. Vadi, you can make your late entrance. Now, so today is it's a day of reflection. It's a day of looking at a country in crisis. But more importantly, what do we do? And that's what the panel of speakers are going to give us some of their thoughts. But in trying to answer what do we do, what's the life lessons from somebody like Uncle Kathy and his generation? Do their lives have any ideas or insights as to how we deal with a country that is visibly collapsing in front of us? And I don't think that anybody here would want to say that we are not in that kind of crisis. The issue is, how do we change it? Do we change it through shutdowns, enforced shutdowns? Do we change it through the electoral system? Do we change it through rebuilding community organizations and activists as we did 40 years ago when we launched the UDF? Or is it so hopeless that we are all saying to our children, leave, which is what many are doing across everywhere today, rich, poor, black, white. Parents are saying to their kids, if the opportunities come, go. You just have to look at the trends of young people leaving the country today, across race. Because they don't see the possibility of change. So this conversation is also happening today at the Mandela Foundation. It's the same conversation. How do we change this place? And that's what we're wanting to talk about here today, as we recall Kathy and his life, but also his passing 6 years ago. So it's a huge welcome to all of you. And we've got a couple of foundations, 3 foundations in particular, to just give us messages. And to kick us off, I'm going to ask Razia on behalf of the Mandela Foundation. I know Selo sends his apologies because of the event that they have. He can't be here. But Selo, Razia will kick off, then Selo Mlangeni from the Mlangeni Foundation, and then Auntie Sophie from the Sophie and Henry the Brain Foundation, but also the Kathrada Foundation. And I'm not sure which other foundations you are on, Auntie Sophie, but on behalf of all of them, you will talk to us as well. Razia, over to you.
Thank you, Sean. As Sean said, our CEO, Selo Hatang, is attending a critical dialogue series discussion today on what the time is now, what do we do? And I think that's the question that's uppermost on the minds of most people who are concerned about our country and our future. So good morning to all of you. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, the Chief Executive, Selo Hatang, and the staff of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, we are honored to participate in this event, marking the 6th anniversary of the passing of Ahmed Kathrada, Mr. K, as he was called by most at the Foundation. He is fondly remembered for his guidance, humor, immense insight and knowledge of the seminal moments in our country's turbulent path to freedom and democracy. This year will also mark the 10th anniversary of the death of Nelson Mandela, at whose funeral Mr. K brought the nation to tears with his final words of farewell to his elder brother, his mentor, and his leader. Madiba and Mr. K first met in 1946, and over almost 7 decades, they developed a deep bond, forged in a shared vision and a common goal, and in action in the eradication of oppression and exploitation in South Africa. Both cut their teeth in the revolutionary ferment of the youth leagues of the African National Congress and the Transvaal Indian Congress, and both went to play leadership roles in the various campaigns of the 1950s. They were on trial together on 3 occasions: after the Defiance campaign with 18 others, and the treason trial of 1956, and the famous Rivonia trial where they both received life sentences. When Madiba went underground after the acquittal in the treason trial in 1960, Mr. K was tasked to look after Madiba. In 1961, he arranged and drove Madiba to the secret interview with ITN reporter Brian Woodlake. And in 1962, when Madiba was asked to speak at the conference of the Pan-African Movement for East, Central, and Southern Africa, which became the OAU and then later the AU in Addis Ababa, and then to travel through Africa to arrange political and economic support for the newly founded military wing Umkhonto we Sizwe. Mr. K was also tasked with arranging Madiba's travel. He arranged with Amin Kaji to smuggle Madiba to Botswana, and from there he took a plane, flew to Tanzania, and then throughout Africa, and then he visited London in June of 1964. And then in July, when he was in Ethiopia again, he was asked to return to South Africa. And soon after that, he was arrested on the 5th of August 1962. And he was charged for leaving the country illegally and inciting workers to strike. Mr. K once again was asked to head the Secretariat of the Defense and Aid Committee that was set up to support Madiba during the trial. They were both sentenced to life in 1964 with other Rivonia trials and were jailed on Robben Island and then in Portsmouth prison. During this long incarceration, they developed an even closer relationship. So it was not surprising that when Madiba became South Africa's first democratic president, he appointed Mr. K as his parliamentary councillor. When the Nelson Mandela Foundation was established in 1999, Mr. K served as a trustee until late 2016 when he retired. He was an advisor on several of the NMF projects, such as the exhibition and the book Prisoner in the Garden, which was based on Madiba's prison records, and the book Mandela, the Authorized Portrait. In the 4 years after Madiba's passing, Mr. K played the role of the elder statesman, the moral compass and beacon who spoke truth to power, calling on those who abuse power and succumb to greed to resign. As in life, his funeral was a powerful moment, which is succinctly summed up in the eulogy by former President Kgalema Motlanthe, who is both a trustee of the Kathrada Foundation and the Mandela Foundation. And it was at this very venue that he said, "It is worth noting that Comrade Ahmed Kathrada remained politically engaged with the challenges of his time to the very last minute of his life. He neither tired nor let the fragility of old age stand in his way. He was a redoubtable, diligent, and passionate activist for social change and justice, the very matter for human agency." It is with this note that I am to continue with the long walk that both Madiba and Mr. K walked to create a better life for all South Africans and for the oppressed and exploited wherever they are. So it is with that in mind that we despair at the state that South Africa is in today, and the struggle, as we say at the Mandela Foundation, is not over. The legacy lives on through you. So we appeal to each one of you to do what you can to bring about change in our beloved country. Thank you.
Let me also acknowledge the presence of Pumla Williams, former DG of GCIS and other portfolios in government, besides a long career in the ANC, both here and outside. Selo, on behalf of the Mlangeni Foundation.
Thank you, Nisha. I hope you can all understand that. Unfortunately, I have to recognize my voice is not good. I've been down with flu, so always recovering now. I would like to also recognize Anne-Sophie, one of our stalwarts, our heroine, is Tolande. Good morning, Anne-Sophie. And I'd like to greet all of you on behalf of the Union and Mlangeni Foundation. And I'd like to thank the Kathrada Foundation for giving us this opportunity to come here and celebrate and witness this day. As Nishan said, we're here 6 years ago. How time flies. I never thought that today I'll be standing here to witness this. As we're gathered here today to reflect, to pay tribute, to remember Aunt Kathy, our stalwart, our liberator, our hero, a very outstanding individual who have sacrificed his life so that we could be here today as a free nation. Auntie Kathy to me was a gentle giant, very soft-spoken, and a man with dedication. And he was very passionate about the plight of South Africans, especially the youth. I'm happy to see that some of them are here today. He was very passionate about the youth, that they could continue, as Nishan said, to carry the history of this country. We have a long history, and we need not to forget it. Auntie Kathy to me was a moral compass. He was a man who speaks truth to power. As we all know, the years that have gone by, how troubled he was about the way our country was going. And he was not afraid to voice it out. That's Aunt Kathy, Auntie Kathy. He hated racism with all his heart. And I'm happy that the Kathrada Foundation, as you can see, one of the slogans there, that they continue with that fight of fighting racism that unfortunately we still witness today after 28 years of freedom. We still have those people who are still, acting in a very racial way. And I would say, to honor Auntie Kathy, we have to continue, all of us, not only the Kathrada Foundation, but each and every one of us has a role to play. Auntie Kathy was born in a very small town. I won't claim that I know the history of Auntie Kathy. There are those who know it better than me. He was born in a small town called Swaziland. And because of the apartheid laws then, in that small town, there was no school for Asians, as we were divided, Indians, colored, blacks, whites. So the only school that was there, it was for whites and blacks. So unfortunately, Kathy couldn't attend his schooling when he was supposed to do so. So already, at the age of 8, he was forced by the racial laws to leave his parents and come to Joburg so that he can find a school where he can go to. That was the start of the long journey of Uncle Kathy in the struggle against racism, against oppression. Then he met people like Dr. Dadu de Kachalias, that also played, I think, a role in influencing his thinking. And he became very active at a very tender age. At 12, he was going around putting placards, writing slogans. Even though maybe he was not politically matured then, but he was already active. As I say, I'm glad to see the young people here. We have to carry on with that struggle. So he was first arrested at the age of 17. 17 was still, to me, was still a child. But because of his activities, Uncle Kathy was arrested for the Defiance campaign as a voluntary, because they've just imposed the law that the people of Asian descent are not allowed to own land. So he has to travel all the way to Durban to to go and occupy land, the defiance campaign, and he was arrested and served a 1-year sentence. And that was just the beginning of his long journey of in and out of prison several times. He was banned, house arrest, but as he was defiant as he was, he continued carrying up his work underground until he was again arrested finally in 1963 for the famous treason trial, with Mandela, the Sisulus, and the others. And they were sentenced, as we know, to Robben Island for a life sentence. They came back after 26 years with no bitterness. They continued where they left for a free and democratic and non-racial South Africa. And Keith was not a man who was interested in position. He was working his way just quietly. Not like we see today, people they join organizations just to have a position of leadership and all that. But Keith was not like that. He was a dedicated member of the ANC. And he worked hard for this democracy that we are enjoying today. He was such a humble man. I remember when he visited Denmark some years ago, I think it was 1996 or 98. So he came, he was visiting Denmark, and also to say thank you to the anti-apartheid movement. So we were with him that day. We had the bride together with him. It's my time. Okay. No, but I have a great respect for Uncle Keith, and I'm happy that the foundation, the Kathrada Foundation, is continuing on this journey, and we have had some activities together to carry on with this work. So please, let's continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Salo, on behalf of the Andrew and June Mlangeni Foundation. So, sorry, what's this thing you're placing here? Oh, no, we must be sure, because Auntie Sophie's come to speak now, so I don't want anything to happen to you when you come here. Auntie Sophie, over to you. Your message today, please, and a big round of applause just for your presence here.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's so good to see so many faces of friends and comrades that we haven't seen for a long time. And like Pumla was mentioning this morning to me, it's always under such circumstances that we sort of get together and then meet up with one another again. But I would also like to say good morning to Barbara in Extensia, and to Zora, Comrade Kathy's niece, his faithful escort, who was his personal assistant and friend, who's here with us this morning. So my sincere thanks goes to the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation for the privilege to pay tribute to Comrade Ahmed Kathrada, whose mortal remains was laid to rest here 6 years ago. I met Kathy as we all fondly refer to him, for the first time during the 50s at a fundraising party when I was involved in SAPTU. And if you can remember that SAPTU was a forerunner of COSATU of today. So I was at the fundraising party, and that is when I met Kathy. And as I described to you at his funeral, he so loved dancing. He took it very seriously. He believed he could dance, but he had 2 left feet, but wouldn't give up because of his fondness for it. I also remember his many valuable attributes, and one of them was his kindness and compassion, and I want to speak about that kindness. During the Congress movement, I was appointed as an organizer, and because there was very little money, we were not paid. But Kathy, out of his own kindness, would collect amongst the comrades, and they too didn't have money, but still they were willing to part with the little that they had, and he would come and give it to me because I needed to pay my boarding where I lived at the hostel in N Street. So that was Kathy's kindness, but he also, out of compassion, arranged with Helen Joseph for me to get a full, nutritious meal at least once a day. Because I was an organizer of the Colored Congress at that time, and he felt it was important because of his commitment and his vision of a non-racist South Africa. He felt that all the different race groups should be organized. But in the colored situation, the Colored Congress was just a band of people in Johannesburg. The majority of the Colored Congress was in Cape Town, a larger organization. So Kathy arranged for me, through Helen Joseph, that I go to the office. Helen Joseph was the secretary of the Medical Aid Society of the white section. And they had a canteen, and every day the white members of the medical aid would have their lunch there. And I would have to walk from Johannesburg, Main Street, right down to where the offices were in N Street. And I would have to wait there until all of the white members are out of the canteen, and then I would be sneaked in by the auntie who did the cooking and sit down to have a full meal. And that is why Kathy arranged, because he felt that the organizer for the Colored Congress should be a strong and healthy person, and he felt that this is one way of keeping me healthy and strong because of his commitment to his vision of a non-racist South Africa. But there were times when he was a humble and a dignified soul. He was fearless and brave and was steadfast in his commitment to the principles that he stood for. But there were also times when his cup runneth over and he would lash out, especially to the special branch of those days. They fell victim to his indignation during times that they harassed him. Another side of Kathy's personality was his naughty streak and dry sense of humor. Like the time when a small group of us were socializing during a recess at a gathering, and up marched a very well-known comrade and joined us. And with a deadpan face, Kathy said to us, the group, "Do meet comrade so-and-so," I can't give you the name. Do meet comrade so-and-so, the most married man in the whole Congress movement. I need not say any more. So we are here today to pay our respects to a humble giant of immense proportions who had a vision of a just and equal society and he would live his vision to the very end. But long before he passed on, Kathy already observed the signs of the rot and the decay that had set in, and he saw his noble vision began to fade into obscurity in his beloved country. And so, true to his conviction, he condemned the chaos, the looting, and the destruction that was unfolding before his eyes. So the question and the elephant in the room is what Sean referred to. How can we all arrest the degradation which we suffer from in our own democracy? Can we safely say that our hopes rest in civil society, in the younger generation, and in every capable woman and man to put enough effort and determined constant pressure to those in authority? So we owe it to Kathy's sacrifices that he made so sincerely and so tirelessly to realize and defend everything that he fought for. He was a selfless, true servant leader, which is not what we have today. So let us remain encouraged, inspired, and emulate his legacy. So long live Kathy's immortal spirit, long live. I thank you.
I wish you would have shared the name, you know. Yeah. but hopefully it will come out at some point. Because these are the stories that make all these characters human. But as we gather here, we must also remember and pay tribute to Ahmed Kathrada, who passed away a short while ago. Now Zora was Kathy's secretary outside of prison. She handled his communication to the family, diligently made sure that he was kept updated on everything that was going on. And when you read the letters between them, you can see him extracting all the gossip and the skinner about each and everybody there. Where is so-and-so? Why is he not studying? Why are people objecting to this marriage? Tell me about this child. What is she doing? And in that way, he kept abreast of all the family developments. And because of that, Zora wasn't able to go and visit him. She was prevented from doing that. And then when he came out, when we started the foundation, another Zora comes on board. This time becomes the full-time secretary almost for Kathy. And which is why when the news of Ahmed Kathrada passing came out, Catherine and others saying, man, how do we get hold of Ali? We need to go and give Ali our condolences. But both of these Zoras just made sure that Kathy was able to be alive in prison, but also when he came out, Zora managed his diary, and in that diary were public events and commitments and engagements in the last 5-6 years of his life of almost 200 activities a year. And that you must blame Zora. Whether he would have lasted longer, but it's Zora's fault. Also a special welcome to Kulu, the historian now, the recorder of history, and your own book that has come out now has been quite powerful. Thanks Kulu for that as well. We now have a group of 4 people who work for the foundation, but whom we've asked to talk about what are the lessons that they draw from Ahmed Kathrada to help understand and help deal with the crisis that this country is in. And I want to call them up. Maybe you want to put chairs or you want to sit somewhere there. But the first is Nonkosi. Nonkosi has worked in the foundation as a volunteer, as just an arrival from the Eastern Cape. Pitch up there and says, well, everybody said I must come to this foundation and the foundation must sort me out. Started as an intern, became our administrator. Today is an organizer in a place called Finetown for a project on accountability. So, Nonks, over to you.
Thank you. My apology for my voice. I was singing on Sunday at church, but I will try. I will greet you in the name of Jesus. My name is Nonkosi from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Now I am a community facilitator in Finetown. It has been 6 years since Kathy passed on, but I still have emotions, especially when I came to visit him in his grave. It was very fortunate to have had time with Kathy while I was working at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Kathy was a person that you could always turn to for guidance and advice. His wisdom made all of us feel very confident and secure. Much has happened to our beloved country since Kathy passed on the 28th March 2017. Many of you will agree that South Africa is a country in crisis. In this time of crisis, what we need more than ever before is Ahmed Kathrada's honesty and courage. He always spoke out against what he believed was wrong. What he believed was wrong. That is the legacy we need to uphold as young people. It is important to ensure that Kathy's value and teachings continue in the present, to ensure that the freedom that he fought for continues with the next generation. 6 years after his passing, Kathy remains a guideline for all of us, so that when we have been confronted with uncertainty and doubt, all we need to do is to look at the example he set and follow the light that he brought into our world. I have no doubt that Kathy will have values the accountability work that the Ahmed Kathrada is promoting. I have no doubt our work supports empowering community with information and knowledge so that they can hold those in power to account. Accountability must be the culture we build in our lives, from those in political office to those in public administration, from our churches to our sports club. We must hold each other accountable for our decision and our action. We must do this to honor Kathy and to continue his legacy through the work of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you.
What Nonkosi left out is that in this place called Fine Town, there's a government-funded clinic built unopened for at least over 5 years. And around that has been a huge accountability project. We now have, and pressure onto the province and the Joburg Council. And we are now told at the end of April is when this clinic will be opened. If it were not for you and the community that you've helped to organize around this, that clinic might not have opened. Let me also, we're going to call Zakira next. Now Zakira also worked at the foundation. Zakira started at the Rising Sun, then applied to come and work there. And we asked her, we said, well, what are your impressions of this foundation? She says, no, you guys just do events. You might as well just be an events management company. I don't know what value you add here. I'm not sure if she still holds that same view today. But Zakira now has moved off from the foundation. She is the person who holds the Defend Our Democracy movement together. And on her shoulders was, we had to rely on her strength and her shoulders to ensure that there was an opposition and a vocal opposition to the shutdown call. Zakira and her team managed to persuade over 40 organizations to put their name to a very brave statement to say, we don't support this. This is not the way in which we want to see change going. And you will hear from her now. What is the DOD about? What is her remembrances of Kathy and the lessons that she draws from that? Zakira?
Thanks, Sean. So it took me a while to put some thoughts together for today because I think that a lot of what Uncle Kathy is about has been spoken about already, and everyone here knows Uncle Kathy in some way or the other. Then I thought, okay, maybe I need to say some things about Uncle Kathy and our current state of democracy, and the first thing that comes to mind is the letter that he wrote to former President Jacob Zuma asking him to step down. But again, the letter speaks for itself even 7 years later. So I thought that there were some lesser known but equally important writings and moments of Uncle Kathy, and Zora will remember some of those moments that could be reflected on as we begin to look at how we need to deal with this country in crisis and what we need to do to fix it. So quite a few years ago now, I was a very inexperienced communications officer at the Kathrada Foundation, and Uncle Kathy decided he's not going to oppose the renaming of de Klerk Boulevard at the time. And I was very nervous about putting out the statement because I felt that we're going to be called not progressive enough, and Uncle Kathy is going to be criticized for, in a way, showing a bit of support to de Klerk by saying that, yes, we recognize his role in apartheid, but we must also recognize his role in ending apartheid. And there must be a recognition of both. I was very nervous for the foundation as well, and what would be the criticisms that would be leveled against it. It certainly didn't reflect popular sentiment, but it did raise an important question in post-apartheid South Africa. That yes, we must recognize the injustices of the past, we must deal with the systemic racism that still exists in our institutions, but should we continue vilifying white people, and in this instance, the very face of apartheid, and Uncle Kathy was making a case that we shouldn't. For me, this brings to mind the recent interview by Andre de Ruyter and the type of vilification he faced, particularly from the ANC. And this was not only during the end of his term at ESCOM, but during his time there as well, and the lack of support that came through. So to defend our democracy, we issued a statement. We said that this kind of vilification is unjustified. But at the back of my mind when we put out this statement was, are we going to be called not being progressive enough on this issue? And it does beg the question, I ask myself, that did race matter in the way in which the Rater was treated? I have no problem with people critiquing his time at ESCOM. I think that that's necessary. But the same language used to vilify the Rater, will this be the same language that is used, for example, against people within the ANC or connections to the ANC who may have done worse at ESCOM? And this should lead us to question what we mean by a progressive politics. Perhaps those who once represented the ideal of a progressive politics aren't so progressive anymore. What does this mean in the context of a mayor in Cape Town who's just fired his MMC after a little bit of an investigation, a report comes through, and there's a firing that takes place? Yet we see that there are people who are implicated in the Zondo report that within the governing party still hold some position or the other. And I think that this speaks volumes in itself. Like the de Klerk example above, there are a few other moments where Uncle Kathy took a very principled stance that was unpopular. Uncle Kathy, over and above writing that very famous letter to the former president, signed a Save South Africa pledge, and this pledge demanded honest, accountable, open and responsive leadership. At that time, I remember that there was all sorts of criticism being flung about at Save South Africa. They were called, for example, it was said to be that this was a big business initiative pushing a particular agenda, very much like the Bell Pottinger rhetoric that we're now familiar about. But Uncle Kathy supported this initiative. He attended one of the events that took place at Constitution Hill. And it was in line with the stance of the letter that made both him and the Kathrada Foundation unpopular in some quarters. Some at the time felt that the foundation was being too political, that we would get our hands burnt because we were being critical of the ANC, and very few at the time were prepared to do this. But Kathrada's voice, that of Sipho Pityana and a few others, were amongst the very select that were beginning to speak out. But that played an important role. It played a catalytic role and paved the way for others within the ANC, within other civil society organizations, to come out and to speak out against the president who had failed to uphold the constitution, to recognize the extent of capture and corruption that occurred during his tenure, and also how this posed a threat to democracy. So today, what are the threats to our democracy that we need to be vocal about? Sean mentioned earlier the statement that we put out with a range of organizations on the national shutdown and the related forms of intimidation and fear-mongering that accompanied it. But the undertone from some civil society organizations was that we weren't being progressive enough. Again, I question, what does this notion of progressive mean? Does it mean that we must allow almost fascist-like fear-mongering to count as the right to protest? Does progressive mean that we can't speak out against the EFF or any other political party because we're afraid we'll be labeled something or the other? Uncle Kathy and Barbara Hogan took a stance and they voiced their disapproval about the South African government denying Dalai Lama a visit for Archbishop Tutu's birthday celebrations. Again, it wasn't a very popular stance because we had to maintain good relations with China. In today's context, we need to ask ourselves, do we need to be doing military parades with the US after they've invaded vast parts of the Middle East? Do we need to be doing military parades with Russia as they currently invade the Ukraine? And as we await the visit by President Putin to South Africa with the ICC now having pronounced against him, this debate is going to become even more fierce. On a lighter note though, in relation to international politics, when former President Mandela passed on, I was with Uncle Kathy doing a range of interviews. And there was a French journalist who phoned and said, will South Africa's democracy be under threat now that the former president has passed away and Mandela was the founding father of our democracy? And Uncle Kathy very coolly asked the journalist, why are you asking me such questions about South Africa when in France at the moment you're trying to ban the hijab? So as democracy globally and around the world, I think there are similar issues being faced. As it comes into question, we must ask, what do we envision as a progressive politics? For the moment, for the immediate, as we fix our country, I think it's not too difficult to say that people can work together to fix their potholes or to get accountability in their communities without some of these ideological issues being at the forefront of what needs to be done to fix the country. Yes, ideology is important, but sometimes we need to do what needs to be done to fix up. How do we get to a point where things are measured by the impact they will have on people, rather than whether it fits a shallow understanding of what constitutes progressiveness? As I look back, I recognize that the stance by Uncle Kathy on numerous occasions was not always popular. All who see themselves as truly progressive today, and this is not the narrow version of the word that we are accustomed to, must expect criticism and the cold shoulder as we continue the road ahead. Lastly, given the crisis that we face and the difficult task of fixing this country, I thought it apt to end by a quote from Lord of the Rings, and I'm sure that it would have been as applicable in Uncle Kathy's time as it is now. So Frodo, who's the hobbit that's now doing a particular mission in the book, says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." And Gandalf, who's the wizard, says, "And so do all who live to see such times." But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what we do with the time that is given to us. And I think Uncle Kathy, Auntie Sophie, Andrew Mlangeni, and others here have demonstrated what they did with their time. And now we have to decide what we do with our time. Thank you.
I don't think anybody else should speak now. Should just walk home. Thanks, Zakira. Brave, honest, direct. That was our first communications person. This young man standing here, Zuzipe Bachi, just joined us yesterday to take over the communications work in the foundation. Warm welcome to you as well. Another young woman who joined us just about over a year ago said she didn't want to go into law, finished the LLB, worked in some legal company, but said because her family background, father's ex-Robben Islander, Delmas treason trialist, and so forth, she didn't want to waste time there. She wanted to come into a foundation to see whether she could make a difference. Ratabile Ratsomo heads up our anti-racism work, has just finished a huge anti-racism week. I don't know how many thousands of young people you've reached this year. Last year was over 15,000 young people in schools. But a very important dialogue that happened on the 21st, a global dialogue against hate with a range of international organizations that she has managed to pull together. Because this issue of racism and hatred is now a global phenomenon. And Ratabile that's one of the areas of work that she drives. But let me not take away all of your words. Ratabile Ratsomo.
Thank you to Mr. Bolton. As he mentioned, my name is Ratabile Ratsomo and I do run the anti-racism program at the foundation. Throughout the time that I've been at the foundation, Mr. Bolton himself has often posed the question to us whether we think that non-racialism still remains relevant in South Africa today, and whether it's something we should still be mentioning in 2023. At first, the question amazed me because I thought to myself, why would it not be relevant if racism continues to be a large signifier to an individual's quality of life? And since Mr. Bolton has first asked this question, I have chosen to continue to interrogate why I so readily assumed that it should still be relevant. In essence, what it is about the anti-racist legacy of Ahmed Kathrada that I continue to carry forward today. To begin answering this question, I'd like to share a bit more about myself. I'm obviously a black woman, almost 28 years old, privileged enough to have gone to a Catholic private school my whole life, and then on to tertiary education where I managed to complete my BA LLB in the allocated time. I recognize my relative class privilege in being able to state these facts about myself. And I know to many, my story sounds like the successes of the anti-apartheid liberation movement, where a young black girl can go through her life without racism being a barrier in it. When it comes to the born-free generation, that is the assumption about a lot of us. That a true rainbow nation was born through us and would bear fruit to a country full of tolerance and harmony. So why is it that we continue to still talk about racism and non-racialism? I'm not sure yet whether the debate has been settled on what non-racialism truly means, but I came across an understanding of it that I really liked and I'd like to share today. I read that non-racialism has its roots in the politics of Christian humanism, which states that humanism regarded Christianity as transcending race by offering an ultimate goal of interracial harmony based on the brotherhood of man. And why I think I like this understanding of non-racialism is because what rang true to me was the essence of a world where race really had no effect on the quality of life I lived. A world where I didn't start off by describing myself as a black woman. From as early as I can remember, my understanding of being a black girl meant that I had to practice the principles of tolerance, understanding, and compromise. My family made it clear to me that as a black girl, my journey was not linear, and that as much as apartheid had ended, the perceptions of people with my skin color were still carried in the DNA of this country. To me, this meant that whenever I faced conflicts in my multiracial school, race could never be the basis of any disagreement. It meant that I knew how to enter a store, to make eye contact with someone who worked there, and to smile and say hello, almost as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm not trying to steal anything." It also meant that even when faced with blatant and explicit racism, my reaction to that could never be that of the angry black woman. Although there are a lot of examples I can make about the socialization of a black person, that is not the aim of this today. I choose to characterize these moments as gray spaces that exist in a country which is anchored heavily by the past injustices it has faced. These gray spaces are not unique to me and my family, and are even less unique to many South Africans who exist between these gray spaces. These gray spaces are categorized by ignorance, by misunderstanding, mistrust, and hatred, but most importantly, these are the spaces that force individuals to question the race factor. Having to question the race factor is not unique to one race. It is something that happens across all racial lines and can be both positive and negative. However, it is in these gray spaces where I believe a lot of my work at the foundation must be done. But to do so, we need to learn how to navigate these gray spaces in order to gain understanding, trust, and tolerance. The few facts that I shared about myself earlier paint somewhat a serene picture of a post-apartheid South Africa. However, it is only in those gray spaces of those facts that you'll begin to understand who I am and why it is I am committed to deepening non-racialism. I sometimes feel like the topic of race is seen as the ugly stepchild of politics. It is a conversation that no one wants to have, but is forced to acknowledge in some way or the other. But I encourage us all here today to boldly take a step into these gray spaces, to be courageous in the conversations we have about race, and to build bridges of understanding and cooperation. Uncle Kathy articulated it best when he said, to build a strong foundation for a new country, the elements of forgiveness, absence of wickedness, absence of hatred, absence of revenge is very crucial. For me personally, my version of a non-racial South Africa is one where our livelihoods are not threatened by these gray spaces. It is a South Africa which I do not begin by describing myself as a black woman, and it is one where I can grow up without being socialized in what it means to be a black woman. It is one where the alleviation of poverty and inequality bond me with my fellow South Africans. And my dream for a truly non-racial South Africa once again was articulated very well by Uncle Kathy when he was bestowed the Freedom of the City Award. In this speech, Uncle Kathy stated that we can only be satisfied and happy when every child wakes up in a warm house, has a good nutritious breakfast, is able to say a loving goodbye to both working parents, goes to school in a safe and reliable transport, and is met at school by teachers who are there on time, ready and able to teach. The true essence of anti-racism work is about the fair and just treatment of everyone. It says to us that although we have faced injustices in our country, that we should use these injustices to inform the way in which we seek equality, fairness, and just treatment. The very essence of it tells us that every child should be born into a country where the hardest challenge of the day is the calculus problem they have yet to grasp. I urge us all today to use these words as a reminder of a truly non-racial South Africa. I urge us to recommit to a South Africa free from racism, poverty, and inequality, and to turn these grey spaces into the neighboration we wish to strive to be. To my fellow born-free generation, I encourage us to remember the words that wars were not won overnight. It is our duty to take forth Kathrada's legacy and turn it into our reality. Let us be patient and steadfast in our quest for a non-racial society, and to encourage those that come after us to build bridges of understanding in those grey spaces. So the answer to the question Mr. Bolton has asked us is that non-racialism remains relevant in 2023. It will continue to be relevant until such a time that we have built a society that transcends race, and one where every child is free and happy to be themselves. Let us hold each other accountable, educate each other about racism, and ultimately build a community that is bonded in its quest for equality. Thank you.
This year, a few days ago, one of the young people who featured in the top 3 of our essay writing competition, young girl from Cape Town, refugee here, her essay is about her fear of being killed because she is deemed to be a foreigner here. Got a message last week that she and her family were attacked by neighbors, primarily because she's deemed to be not from the country, but also because the profile that she had received because she won this essay writing competition. 15 or 16-year-old. And that's some of the work that Ratabile has to deal with. You all are familiar with the incident in Bloemfontein, the Nakedi family. We have had to engage with this family, with the father, the mother, with the kids, and providing all kinds of support to ensure that they are able to get through this. Now, we don't have a base in Bloemfontein, but we've had to develop some kinds of support systems to ensure that they were able to now get through what they were dealing with. And you've all seen the visuals. 2 young boys get into a pool, all but one of white people in the pool get out and almost want to kill them. And that's why the issue of racism is one that we will always want to foreground our work on. But the hope and the future is with young people in this country. Nobody epitomizes that more than Irfan. Irfan has built a powerful youth program that today has become a reference point nationally and internationally. That program has now built a national youth coalition, and they said to me last year they got 2,500 young people to march on June 16 in Pretoria. This year they want 20,000. So Auntie Sophia said they must add 1, so that they have 1 more than what you were able to get at Union Buildings. So it's 20,001 is what they must get. Irfan, over to you.
I have a strong sense of just saying I'm covered, Mr. B, because how do I go after everyone who's spoken today? I'd like to start off by saying, Amandla. I still remember the days and the nights before Kathy had passed, and there was so much of anxiety and worry in the air. I think just outside of his flat, as many of us gathered there, as Mr. B said, responding to many of the media who were requesting interviews because the nation was waiting to hear what of Kathy? Is he going to be okay? For a young lad like me, I had not imagined how deeply I would have been moved by that moment in particular. You see, for me, the great man that is Kathrada or Uncle Kathy was no savior or no messiah. Neither do I believe that he was perfect. But most certainly, he was a true example of the type of leader one could count on. Devoted to the cause of justice, committed to tackling the issues of their time, and empathetic to the people who he had to serve. Beyond the hashtags of Remember Kathrada, Kathy at 94, Kathy at 96, and all those other hashtags, all of which I had really spent time looking back at on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, of the many people who had profiled his life and who he had an impact on. Beyond those hashtags, he truly defined how to lead by example. At Madiba's funeral, Kathy captures it beautifully and so aptly, that in death we are once more challenged as people from every strata, religion, and position to think about their own actions or how their own actions do and can change the world for the better or for worse. For years I've come to realize the sheer love and dedication a simple man like Kathy had for us as the people, committing his entire life to the service and liberation of all of us here today, and the millions more who may or may not know of this gallant revolutionary. I was tasked today to think about that life and that legacy in relation to the example of how to respond to a country in perpetual crisis. Kathy, in a time of crisis, is a critical reminder, not merely of the values, and I thank the previous speakers for speaking of those values, but of the practice and actions that emanate of those values and those principles. Too often we get carried away in the simplification of people and memorialize them in words. But it wasn't the words that set them apart or set him apart. It was his actions, because words are not nearly enough, especially in a time like today. Kathy stood up for justice and was committed to non-racialism, as the previous speakers spoke about. But while those things are well known, the question I pose is, how were those ideals practiced? How did he practice and live by them? Prisoner 46864 was a man. Prisoner 46864 was not just the 26 years of imprisonment that he endured, which, by the way, he could have appealed, but stood true to remain with his comrades as a true testament of solidarity and commitment. Prisoner 46864 was unshakable, devoted to the quest of freedom and justice, not merely for himself, but for the many who were affected by the brutality of apartheid. Apologies, the issues of technology, I've lost my space. It is prisoner 46864 who reminds us that freedom did not fall from the sky. It was fought with blood, sweat, and tears. A reminder once again for the practice of revolutionary activism in order to achieve victory and success. But what is a crisis response? Some definitions state that it's a range of actions taken to plan and manage a disruptive event, or reduce or mitigate any harm that is caused to people, or actions taken in the immediate aftermath of an event, or perhaps an environmental disaster, or the methods used in order for the short-term relief of people after a catastrophe. Or put simply, a crisis is a situation in which something or someone is affected by one or many other things, or serious problems for that case. Now, Zakira alludes to many of these things that we're faced with. But all of these definitions speak of planning, of actions, of steps taken to aid people. Again, led by our deeds, not merely by our words or beliefs. Kathy, in a time of crisis, is the courage to believe that we can build a country that is cohesive and equal. And that while everything may be stacked up against us, having the conviction to believe and imagine and vision something new is something possible. No matter how thin that possibility may be, it is what's required today. His visionary and courageous leadership is what prompted him as a young man to stand up to Madiba as his senior and challenge him to publicly engage Kathy in any township, telling Madiba that his own people will reject their position of the ANC Youth League at the time. While others advised Madiba that it might just be youthful arrogance, Kathy truly believed that their position on not joining the communist and other movements was the wrong position, and that they needed to build collective solidarity. Did that make Kathy an enemy? No. Today, our politics and political culture has become so rotten that members of the same party find themselves drawing battle lines, using the public and our communities as their battleground, taking up arms against opponents without being able to contest the ideas that they stand by. Kathy reminded us that the constitutional democracy we have today was hard fought, and that the leaders across the political spectrum have to have the maturity to work through their differences, to ensure that at the very basic level, as Rita Bile said, the children have the freedom to receive equal and quality education, have the freedom to play in a park that is adequate and safe from harm, and that is not that one where they can come home to a home that is not abusive, as we see today, or where they can get a nutritious meal. Today, the very same government that he fought for and fought with, expect us to remain prisoner to their history. They remain unaccountable to the people who voted for them, and to the many who lie here today behind me. Our municipalities continue to showcase how their political immaturity aids and abets the deterioration of our cities and towns, and limits the services meant to be delivered to the millions of people and residents who grow increasingly disillusioned and distasteful and distrustful of politics. How can I, as a young man, draw confidence in a party that after almost 30 years of governing is unable to solve for pit latrines that have become sites of death for many children? How can I, as a young person, be loyal and maintain loyalty to a cause without that cause being for the economic and social transformation of all our people, and not just for those who aligned to them or who have proximity to them? How can I commit my allegiance to a grouping that operates outside of the masses of our people? As Chris Hani puts, what I fear most is that the liberators emerge as elitists who drive around in Mercedes-Benz and use the resources of this country to live in palaces and to gather riches. That is what we have to contend with, and that is what has prompted this deep decay and this crisis. But all hope is not lost, as Mr. B has said. Kathy was a builder, strategically building alliances and communities, navigating often from behind the scenes of a tough political climate, to stand up and act against wrongdoing. Whether it was the apartheid regime of South Africa or Israel, or his comrades, or his own comrades like Zuma and Ramaphosa and the many others who he had the wisdom to call to order, or equally be called to order himself should there be a need. In a time like ours of mass disillusionment and of a polycrisis, we must rebuild the trust of people. We must take example from Kathy, of Mosi, of Ismail, of Yunus, of Shan, of Mam Sophie, the Sisulus, of my uncle Abdul Bam, and all of you here today. That example must lead us as people to organize. Organize discussions, debates, roundtables. Organize platforms that we can co-create. And like was said earlier, it could be about solving the problem in our community of potholes, or making sure that no person in our community goes to bed hungry, to problem solve. The crisis we are in won't be solved by liberators, or any one leader in particular. It requires the collective brain power, the collective muscle, and the collective voice of every person in this country who wants to create a future that is worth living in and fighting for. It requires the building of strong foundations from a community level, which entail the family well-being, solid support for children, and an environment where we respect and honor each other's dignity. It is for this reason that I personally have committed to rise up to the challenge of our times, to rise up for youth, to rise up for every person who wishes to see a country that is free and hopeful. I have committed to South Africa in Kathy's memory, building a strong alternative political movement on the premise of ethics, justice, and equity. This is no easy feat, but is one that I think needs to inspire hope in a people that have been fast losing hope. As is tradition, I hope to continue engaging you, all of you here today, as I've done before, because young and old, you have a lot to contribute towards the rebuilding of South Africa into something that we can all be proud of. To conclude, 6 years ago, a special moment occurred at this very cemetery. Leading by example again, Uncle Kathy, even in his death, left us a blueprint in which we must work towards. Prof. Johnson captured it so perfectly, and I quote, "Show me another country where the Anglican Archbishop prays at a Muslim funeral, where a white man chairs the proceedings to remember a leader from a black liberation movement, where a sitting president of a developing country is told to step down in a letter from the deceased stalwart of his own party, where the widow of a black man being buried is a white woman who gave her life to the struggle for freedom, and where Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, and other faiths come together in a broad swath of South African humanity to remember a man who fought for all of us, where on and off the stage, no one racial or ethnic group dominated the event. For a moment, just a moment, it felt good to hope again." I close quote. Let that hope reside in each and every one of us here today. I thank you.
I just stand here beaming with pride that these are the people who work at the foundation. And I was saying to Eunice now, there'll be no vacuum if I were to leave tomorrow, because all of them here, as you've heard, can do what's required. And just thanks to all of you for taking the brief and really delivering heartfelt messages that I think on their own are inspirational. Now, to respond to this, we've asked somebody who comes from what I call the UDF generation. Ismail Vadi, former board member of the foundation, but lifelong activist. Make sense of this and your response, please.
Thank you very much, Sean, and good morning to everybody. There was a time when we would quote Marx and Lenin and Gramsci to give credence to our political ideas and arguments. But now, in spite of the big political library I got at home, I didn't know that we now have to rely on Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and Frodo and Gandalf to give us direction. I thought it would have been a little bit more complex and more complicated. But to all the people who've spoken, to particularly the young people, really impressive ideas, challenging, new thinking, and it forces us to begin to look at our past a bit more critically and to be in a more reflective mode. Now, if we look at the 1980s and the early 1990s, that was an important period because it was the period in which we as younger activists, so like Irfan and Zakira and others that are talking now, in the 1980s, we were lighties. And I think our inspiration was the birth of the United Democratic Front. It was a civil society movement come political movement. It had elements of both. but it was able to take the struggle from isolated community-based struggles, small union struggles, strikes, important strikes as they were, or in distinct political events like the NTV Public Day celebration in 1981. What the UDF was able to do was to give it a national character, a national identity and form, and national cohesion. And as that movement really started growing and the momentum was building, the apartheid state panicked. Like it did in 1960, it slapped a partial state of emergency, I think in 1986, and when that failed, it slapped a national state of emergency. But that moment was so different, because I know Isu always used to say, when the state declared a national state of emergency in 1960, and there was a massive onslaught of repression against the liberation movement, by 1965 it had virtually smashed up the movement. People were imprisoned, Robben Island, long-term sentences, others were killed, others were detained, others had gone into exile. And Auntie Sophie might remember, I mean, those were the most difficult years of the movement. But the difference of the 1980s was that as the state intensified its repression, the intensity and the tempo of the mass struggle in the country actually grew and developed. That was a unique feature. And Vali Musa will always say, if there was one mass popular movement of the 20th century that we must really begin to look at very carefully, was the mass movement that we built, the anti-apartheid movement that we built inside the country in the 1980s. Now, so we were young activists, as I said, excited by it, and we thought maybe we were holding the center stage of the struggle. And then comes, 15th of October, Shan, when Kathy, Walter Sisulu, Mlangeni, others, a good number of them, 9 of them, were freed. And that moment, the inspiration it gave us, because for the first time, coming through the state of emergency, you really saw the possibility of change. And last year when we launched the Youth League book, Dr. Shoaib Wadi, I mean, at that point he was in Standard 8, a student in Lenzai, and he told me they marched from the school to go and listen to Kathy speak the day he was, the week in which he was released at Lenzai. So all the kids, all the scholars from Lenzai, from Lenges, abandoned their classes and went to listen to Kathy and Isu speak. And he says he was in Standard 8. And he says, as a young kid, I remember the moment of change is now irreversible. That was that moment. So when we look at what lessons can we learn from that moment? I had the good fortune, I think it was, I'm almost sure it was before Madiba was released in 1990. I had Chami Saluji's car, it was a maroon Peugeot, if I remember correctly, second-hand car that he had given to us to transport Kathy and some of the other leaders to release. But I had a good fortune, it would have been November of 1989, to drive Walter Sisulu to some meeting. And now you're this young activist, you're driving, and you're all sort of excited and tense, but you also want to talk to him. And I asked him in the course of the conversation, how long will this transition take before we come into power? And on the turn, Ismail, 5 years. I got a shock of my life. I said, will this transition take 5 years? This negotiated settlement that we all now remember as 1994. But it happened in 4 years, actually, if you look at it. But the lesson I learned from that is that don't underestimate your organizational capability and capacity. But at the same time, never overestimate the potential of your ability. That's the art of revolutionary science and struggle. If you misread the situation, you will make serious historical mistakes. And I want to give you two examples from our recent past. One was last week, where a movement thought it could impose and spark a revolution in this country from the top. I can say it was a historic failure. They can claim whatever they want to claim, but it was a failure because you don't take the masses for granted. You don't think you can just light a match and people will rise to your challenge. Building a mass movement, a revolutionary movement or movement for change, is painstaking grassroots work and mobilization. There's no shortcut, I can tell you that. I'll give you another example. In the height of the fees must fall struggles, I met one of the young student leaders, and we're trying to discuss and sort of work out where this thing is going. And she asked me, are we in a revolutionary moment? I didn't know if I must laugh or be serious. But I just said, you know what? The state hasn't even pulled out the army to deal with you people. Not that we had to take that choice, I'm not saying that. But when you overestimate the potential of your work, the impact of your work. Now, for the new generation of leaders that are emerging, there's a lesson, a very important lesson in this. And that brings me to the second point, is when Kathy and them were released, man, any opportunity to travel, any invitation, whether it's Toyando or Polokwane, or that time it was Petersburg or somewhere in the Eastern Cape, Kathy was almost ever ready. Of course, when you come out of jail after 26 years, you want to see the country, just get a feel of it, the beauty of it, and to drive. But what was important, in spite of his diary, and I can tell you, I think all of them had a hectic diary for that first 24 months when they were just released. If you ask Kathy that come to a house meeting in Lenasia, and there'll be 10 people that night, Kathy would come to that meeting. Kathy would come to that meeting. Very much unlike, Sean might remember, there's a former premier of Gauteng, when they were organizing in the early years his public events, and he asked how many people will be there, and they said maybe 250. He said, take it off the diary. See, that's the difference. And the second lesson to learn from this is you need to have a grasp of the big picture, but you also need to understand the local dynamics. You need to have your finger on the pulse of what is the ground. What are ordinary people feeling about something? What's their insight? What lessons can we learn from them? What are their issues that are of concern? So we can theorize and talk and analyze about the international balance of forces and imperialism and all of the collapse of the socialist countries, etc. And we can talk about the national balance of forces and all that. But if you don't understand the concrete conditions on the ground, you can't blend the big picture with the small detail. You can't be a revolutionary activist. Now, this is the important thing, is the ability to make time, both for leaders, make time for your activists, your younger people on the ground. You know the strips, I can tell you today, if you ask many of the activists from lands, the few who had the opportunity of traveling with Kathy on those trips, till today they talk about it. That the strip, of course, it was fun and just to get to know the person, but it was a learning trip. Kathy was learning from them as young people or from us, and as much as we as young people were just drawing, like our child would draw from the breast of the mother, from the milk from the breast of the mother. We were just drawing from their wisdom, their experience, their stories, their prison life, etc. But it's that ability. And today, when leaders travel to conferences or meetings, How many activists go with them? Or is it really the blue lights that are racing down the roads? You see, we're losing that. We're losing that ability to work with young people, to build a new generation of leaders. It's patient work, but the fault lies with leaders. But then, there's something wrong also with our young activists. So there are a few young activists, I mean, they now have come out of university. And every time they see me, they say, Uncle Ismail, we must make time to come and see you. I'm waiting for one for the last 6 months. They're very busy. They are busy. They say, it's hectic. I won't mention their names. They are very busy. You'll never learn like that. If you know it all, during the Feast Must Fall movement, I met some of them. And one of the young persons we taught was, so who in the ANC has sent you to handle me, to be my handler? You see, when you have that kind of an attitude as a young activist, you won't learn. You won't learn from the lessons of history, and you won't be able to tap into the reservoir of experience and wisdom and intellect that older generation of leaders have had. So today, it's a two-way thing. I think we're losing it. We're losing it. I'm not only talking of the ANC. I'm talking of just movements across the board, how they're interacting. We either top down, or you have the young people who say we know it all. And so they can rubbish our past. They can rubbish the negotiated settlement, the historic compromises, as if it was just nothing, without understanding what were the dynamics of the moment, and what was the room for maneuverability. And then you begin to chart a political course, a way forward. So that's the second lesson. Don't overestimate, don't underestimate. Keep the national and the local as part of your framework. The third thing is this thing called talent spotting. So I think I'm already alluding to it. You know, in their own way, man. I mean, here were Kathy and them. The only speech he wrote himself, Kathy, was the one he gave at Soccer City when we had the first rally to welcome Walter Sisulu and all of them. That speech he wrote himself. But subsequently, he would call, and I think even Madiba, even Walter, because I know some of us were party to that. They wouldn't say, Kathy wouldn't say write a speech for us. He'd just say, put out some points. Put down some points for us. They would call you to private discussions and say, what's your idea about this thing? What they were doing is tapping into the new ideas of young people. Now, today, how many leaders are doing that? How many leaders? We are talking down to people. We don't even talk to our activists, but we're talking down to the masses of our people. We're not drawing on and blending and fusing and bringing into one melting pot the totality of views, the creativity of ideas, and then putting that as a broader vision of our society and where we should be going. The last point, Sean. Our politics has become caustic. It's intolerant. It's inflexible. Only we are right. We don't listen anymore. So where do we go from here? Right? I mean, we are at a crossroads. There's no two ways. Whether you call it a crisis or an organic crisis, you can use any term, Marxist term you want to, but we are at a crossroads. Where do we move from here? Now we have to draw a leaf. We have to look back at our history, our political history of the last century. So in 1924, we found a coalition government of the National Party under Herzog and the Labour Party under Creswell. Unexpected coalition that toppled Smuts from power. In 1932, after the Great Depression, two arch-Afrikaner political rivals, Smuts and Herzog buried the hatchet because of the economic crisis in the post-Great Depression period that was facing the country. And they merged and formed the South African National Party, which we understand in 1933 became the fusion government. In 1994, the government of national unity was the ANC. Its rival, its enemy, the National Party, and Inkatha. There were serious tensions between the ANC and Inkatha, particularly in KZN. But we formed the government of national unity because we put South Africa first. We put the interest of the country first. Now look at the shambles and the circus that is taking place just in the city of Tshwane. In the last month, 4 attempts to have a mayor, a speaker, and every meeting is either disrupted or adjourned. You can't say that all those parties, I'm not blaming one, you can't say we're putting the people first, man. Now we are putting narrow party political interests and positions and posts above everything else. That is anti-revolutionary. I say it is anti-revolutionary. It's not smart politics. So, I'm just going to throw out a wild idea. Hasn't the time come for 2 of the major parties in this country to look beyond their party box, to open the lids a little bit, from a little song that my kids used to listen when they were young. Open the lids, let some sunlight come in. And shouldn't we begin to talk about a coalition of the bigger parties, because that will be in the best interest of this country. But we cannot have a situation where we're trying to forge coalitions with a whole host of small parties and trading and negotiating, and it's not working out. Let's put the country first.
Thanks, Isma. Yeah, I wish we had time to actually engage on all of the content. It's just been very, very rich. But we need to try and get the program done. I'm going to ask Zora to just deliver a message on behalf of the Kathrada family. And as I've already spoken about Zora's role and the misunderstandings about which Zora has in fact passed away and so forth. It's said that Zora died just as fast as she did. But her collection of letters, keeping that memory alive, is something we will forever be grateful for. And likewise, your role in keeping Kathy active, visible, out there in the public, but in a way that made it easy for him. And it wasn't easy sometimes. He would say, he would agree to things and then, no, I'm not going. And Zora had a way of saying, no, we have to honor these things. And kept a public profile that I think, had we not done, I think he would have faded into obscurity as many other leaders have done in this country. Thank you for that work, Zora. Over to you.
Thank you, Sean. You know, I'm so glad to see Auntie Sophie, our elders, and Uncle Abdul Bam here. Thank you for your time. And to the rest of the friends who are here, thank you. So, I must say, a lot of things have been said politically about Uncle Kathy, but let me speak about the family man. Before I get to that, I must say something to Shan. Shan said, you know, you disappointed so many people when they thought it was you. So that was, yeah. You know, Shan asked for a family member to speak today, and I asked my nephew Aziz Kathrada to speak on behalf of the family. And as I about to get to West Park, he phones to say,
I'm so sorry, I can't make it. Please apologize to Shan and the rest of the guests there. I have been called to an urgent meeting by a prosecutor. And I can't make it. So I was thrown into a bit of a deep end. So I asked him, you know, how do attorneys sleep at night? So he said, well, you know, we don't sleep. We sleep stressed because we're thinking of this matter at hand, and we get up stressed because we've got this matter at hand. I said, let me tell you how an attorney sleeps. He lies on one side and then he turns and lies on the other side. So I let him go to the meeting on that note. But you know, Shan spoke a lot about the elder Zora. She played a critical role in the family with Kathy and giving him news of, we were still very young at the time. And she kept I think it was one letter a month, Shan, if I'm not mistaken at the time. And she kept that one letter a month throughout the times that we were still young. And she gave him all the news. And now I believe that they together in heaven still scattering about family and about the country and where we are at. But you know, when you have a high profile family figure, he's still like, we have fun names for him, like Nana. Some of us call him some say Opa. So you have this in different names for him. And he's still a family man, as high profile as he is. His family values were always so high. And you know, when we had family get-togethers, I go back to 1989 when he was released from prison, and in Willow Street, it was chaos. It was joy that they were home after so many years. And the little ones would stare at this man. Who are you? Where do you come from? You know, they don't know this person. And looking back now at the youngsters that have grown, and then when we still had the family functions, they would ask questions to him that he would answer. And then educating them. You know, the youth sometimes, they're just impossible, and they just want to make a point without realizing that you can make a point, but in a simple manner and in a good manner. You don't have to be loud and start rioting and that. And then this one day, this grandnephew asked, but Opa, tell me, how do you still keep so young and so fit? And he turns around and says, go to jail. You know, he had this complete sense of humor. So I was interviewed by Shan I was a privileged niece to spend so much time with him, because as he was getting on in age, the foundation then decided with Barbara that he needs an assistant, and also she would prefer a family member to look after him. And in January 2011, Shan interviewed me, and I joined the foundation on the 1st of February 2011. A couple of weeks later, Shan was visiting Kathy to have a meeting about something. And we were both at the computer when Shan walked in, and we couldn't figure this out. Remember, we're both from a farm, we're not that technical about technology. And Shan looks at this whole thing, and he puts his hand on his head, he won't remember. And he said, what did I do to get this uncle and niece together? It's the blind leading the blind. You remember that, Shan? You know, in ending, you know, I want to say, as a family, you know, the legacy of Kathy continues so well with this foundation. It is run by a board of trustees that are so disciplined. With Shan as a boss, you know, when he just looks at you, then you must know it's Shan is speaking. He doesn't have to say much, just that look. And you know, these are the things, and a staff that works tirelessly. And it's something the family always speaks about, all the time, that you know, this foundation is so well run. In ending, you know, I printed a poem for Aziz to read out, and I'm going to read it to say, and you know, I got this from when Kathy passed on a couple of days later from a family friend who is now abroad. And in his email he said, Zora, I'm going to send you this poem just as a strength to you and the family. And it goes like this. Author unknown. When I am gone, release me, let me go. You mustn't tie yourself to me with tears. Be happy we had so many years. I gave you my love, and you can only guess how much you gave to me in happiness. I thank you for the love you each have shown, but now it's time I traveled alone. So grieve a while for me, if grieve you must. Then let your grief be comforted by trust. It's only for a while that we must part, so bless those memories in your heart. I won't be far away, for life goes on. So if you need me, call me and I will come. Though you can't see or touch me, I'll be near with all my love around you, soft and clear. And then when you must come this way alone, I'll greet you with a smile and welcome you home. Thank you. Sorry, I was a bit emotional.
Thanks, Zora. An organization that has continued to honor Kathy is the Congress of Business and Economics. They have an annual leadership awards event hosted in the name of Kathrada as well. So we thought it was important to ask the CBE to come and deliver a short message here today. Is Yusuf still here? Yeah. Yusuf? Yusuf Musaji from the Congress of Business and Economics.
Thank you, Sean. You know, as we reflect on the life of Ahmed Kathrada and various aspects, today we've heard a lot of speeches on the life of Ahmed Kathrada, including one revolutionary speech. Ismail? One of the prime drivers of the Congress of Business and Economics to decide on an annual tribute to our heroes event since 2016 was comments made by the late veteran freedom fighter Ahmed Kathrada, after whom the awards are now named. At the inaugural tribute in 2013, Kathy was amongst the first veterans whose sacrifices the CBE recognized, alongside those of a number of others, including Mozi Mullah, whose funeral took place here at Heroes Acres just 2 days ago, as well as Ismail Ibrahim, also buried near him, and others. At the event at the Birchwood Hotel in Parksburg, there was also a panel discussion between what became known as the Great Escape from the notorious building that now houses Johannesburg Central Prison, where several freedom fighters from our community also died at the hands of the vicious apartheid security establishment. Kathy reminded the audience, and he said, remember that these were not the only escapees, as he shared details of many others besides the few who were being honored that evening, including himself. Typical of his efforts to focus on the role of other people despite his own in achieving our democracy, Kathy then gave a number of details of the other escapees. Kathy said too much attention was given to him, to those like him, and Nelson Mandela, who were part of the Rivonia trial, while there were many other trials where others too had endured much torture and long prison sentences. Amongst those he cited was his friend Lalu Isuchiba, who passed on soon after Kathrada, and is also remembered at his gravesite in a special way. He said Lalu had never spoken once during his 18 years on Robben Island with him about the severe torture that he had suffered at the hands of the security police. He said, "I heard about this for the first time after we convinced him to testify at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission." We tend to remember the Rivonia trial, but forget that there were other equally important trials that even our organizations do not honor. I mentioned the special relationship that Kathy and Iso shared because by all accounts, they were inseparable in the last years of their lives as they guided the young, committed people of the Kathrada Foundation that we see here today, as well in their efforts to end the scourge of racialism, sexism, and all the other social ills that just do not seem to go away in our democracy. It must also not be forgotten that the roots of the CBE lie in the Transvaal Indian Congress. So it is also very significant that there is a memorial to Dr. Yusuf Dadu next to Kathy's gravesite. The CBE is especially proud that the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation assented to allowing the name of its illustrious founder to be appended to our annual award. Many of those who were mentioned by Kathrada at the inaugural CBE tribute to our heroes in 2016 have since been honored by the CBE. As we start the 7th year since the passing of Kathy, planning is also underway for the 7th edition of the CBE Ahmed Kathrada Excellence in Leadership Awards to remember the efforts of Kathy and others who brought us to a situation where we can freely undertake such a project which might have landed us in the same position of torture and imprisonment in years past. The CBE would like to believe that in this way it is playing a small role in remembering the great sacrifice of Ahmed Kathrada that we are recalling this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Yusuf. On Saturday, we will host a memorial for Mosi Mullah. The details will be put out later today. It's at the Nana Memorial Hall at 2 o'clock. Iqbal, your other suggestion, that hall is booked. But I'm hoping still that you will deliver the 1,000 people that you thought you'll bring to that venue. So the rest of the details and speakers and all of that will be sorted out. So please just extend the message. For being a bit late, we are asking Catherine to just close off today's proceedings. Not that it's punishment. I mean, she likes talking. So, but we're going to limit you to no less than 2 hours, right? To just close off the proceedings. Thereafter, we'll ask those of you who want. But I think it would be very good for many of the young people with Auntie Sophie and other stalwarts just to do a group picture here. And then we go to the gravesite, those who want to just lay the flowers there in remembrance and do whatever prayers you think is necessary, and then we can depart. Catherine?
Good afternoon. It is truly an honor just to quickly say a few words, but what I do know is that Uncle Kathy is shining down on us today, and he's smiling. He is looking at not only the gathering of people here to honor his legacy, but I know he's shining down on the young people who are here who will carry that legacy forward. I'm so proud of all that is being done by this foundation. It is an honor to be able to stand here today, not just as somebody who I can say was a dear, dear friend, but to stand here to know that his legacy will be taken forward. And no matter how hard the current challenge and situation we find ourselves in as South Africans is, what I do know is that we will find a way through. And we'll find a way through because we have the shoulders of giants to stand on. Such giants, like Uncle Kathy, will ensure that the legacy and the convictions that he lived with are carried through us to get us to the other side of this dark moment in history. It is us who have to, no matter what, as you have perfectly said, it is up to us to stand up to the challenge, and on days like today, to recommit to not only holding the values of this important foundation in building our country, but to stand here and recommit to ensuring that we don't falter and we do not forget our beloved South Africa. Because people who have gone before us gave so much more. And so it is becoming of us to ensure that on days like today, we remember Uncle Kathy. As I stood on the side and listened to all the beautiful stories, I sat and remembered how every morning at 5 a.m. he would send me an email. And he'd share with me something about his prison life in that email. And he'd tell me he has his coffee and his rusk, and today he would share this or that. I've kept that entire laptop because I don't know how else to keep those emails safe. So it's a really old laptop, but I've kept it somewhere safe so that someone someday can help me to retract all of those emails and put them somewhere special. Because not only was this man a leader and a giant in history, not only for South Africa, but for the world, but he was an unbelievable human being with his faults and his beautiful imperfections. This was a man that added so much, not only into the lives of all those who will read about who he was and his legacy, but into those lives who are privileged to have known him, spent a moment of time with him, and for those of us who were able to spend much time with him, and he poured into our cup. Not only did he pour into our cup, but he truly carved and assisted us to understand the path that we need to lead. And so today we remember this great man, we remember his legacy, and may we all look internally to understand what it is that we need to do. And even though this moment in history is difficult for us as South Africans, being South African, as I've said before, is an extreme sport. And we are challenged in so many ways. But let us find what it is that each and every one of us will do as individuals. Let us take all of the, I think it was 4 lessons that Mr. Vadi shared with us earlier. Let us remember those 4 important lessons as we move forward, as we continue to build. Not only must we look back, but we must look forward. And as the light does shine, because we open those boxes and let the light in, let us not forget that each and every one of us has a duty and responsibility to build our nation from the ground up. It doesn't matter who we are and where we come from. Let us stand in our corners, let us be brave, and let us live with the conviction that Uncle Kathy lived. And let us remember his legacy and take it into every corner of South Africa as we continue to fight through this specific moment. Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you for honoring him. And may we never ever forget that we stand on the shoulders of gentle giants like this.
Thank you. That brings an end to the proceedings. Normally we'd like to give people an opportunity to say a few words, but I think we have extended your patience considerably. What I would like is just some help to move this podium, and then Eunice, if you could just organize the photograph that you want, particularly younger people to be here in front, and then the not so young behind them standing.